For me, like that pain point was really around just transparency and simplicity in the construction arena. So we focus on commercial construction, right? So hotels, hospitals, workplace, big complicated spaces with a lot of different stakeholders involved. And I think what happens is everybody in the industry has sort of, created all these very specific silos of what they do and what they don't do. And it's created a lot of redundancy and sort of that type of mentality of everything being siloed and just very cumbersome. I think was really interesting to me to find a way to drive simplicity in a massive industry that could have real substantial change on the built environment, on global supply chains, on climate change, on all of these things, right? Like bringing transparency to an industry that's 5% of GDP seems like, why hasn't this been done yet?
You're listening to What Fuels You, where we deep dive with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business leaders to learn more about their stories and uncover nuggets of wisdom we can all use. I'm your host, Shauna Swerland, CEO of Fuel Talent, an award-winning recruiting firm based in Seattle. Today's guest on the What Fuels You podcast is Nicole Schmidt. Nicole has worked in the construction industry for over 18 years, starting as a designer for large and small hospitality and housing projects around the country before spending the second half of her pre-source career at a variety of manufacturers in sales and business development. After teaching herself enough code to launch Source on her own, Nicole has become passionate about the ways in which technology can serve the construction industry and cognizant of the places that complicated projects will always need a human touch. Welcome, Nicole. Good to see you, Nicole. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, good to see you too, Shauna. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I loved doing the research for this podcast. It's such an interesting business, like in doing the podcast, even just in recruiting for so many years, but in the podcast specifically, when I'm researching, I'm like, yes, these industries that, people create entire businesses in that are like, such a good idea. I love the business that you've started. I can't wait to get into it. So I'm going to hit you first, though, with some rapid fire.
All right.
You ready? Okay.
I'm ready. I like it.
I know that you're a go-getter and you're a mom and you've got tons of stuff going on. So I'm curious what your best way you found is to kind of unwind and unplug.
Yeah. I go on walks. Just take our little Boston Terrier and go on a walk.
Yeah,
Be
love
alone.
that.
Be alone. That's my best way to unwind is to be alone. I'm never alone.
Yeah, you're like, bye, I'm out. I'm going on a walk. What is your favorite place to go camping?
The Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho.
I love that. Beautiful, right?
Yeah, so beautiful. So
Yeah.
beautiful.
What's the first concert that you ever attended?
Faith Hill and Tim McGraw in Chicago.
Oh, nice. And what about
I was like
your
20
favorite?
something. I was old. It's funny saying 20 something is old. My favorite kind of music. I really like hip hop. I'm a big like 90s hip hop person.
Oh, me
So
too.
yeah.
I love that, especially for working out. It's the best. So
Yeah,
what's your
absolutely.
favorite concert you've ever attended?
I just went to the Eras tour, Taylor Swift's Eras tour this summer. It was pretty amazing. We're actually going to see her again next year. So I'm going to take my daughter.
Yes,
I went with friends and I'm going to take my daughter and do my sister and niece. So it'll be fun.
that'll be amazing as she's beyond talented. Okay,
Yeah.
I know that you're like me, you're an Oprah fan. So if you could
Yep.
have lunch with Oprah, what would you want to ask her?
Oh, how I think she's done a really phenomenal job of like, you know, growth as an individual and staying very grounded as well. And like, how do you balance those two things of like, growing and, you know, going through a lot of different stages in life that are very different maybe than where you grew up or came from or started out in your career and how do you grow and also stay grounded and stay true to who you are and what parts need to change and what parts make you uniquely you.
Yeah. Did you watch the Golden Globes last night?
I only watched little clips of it last night, but it I actually rewatched her clip from like
Yeah.
years ago, when she was accepting her Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yeah, she was on last
Yeah.
night. She looks amazing. And of course, Taylor Swift was on, another
Yeah.
favorite of yours. She also looked incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you do? This is me. I would love asking this questions like selfishly. What do you do to set yourself up for either a good day or a good week?
Oh, set myself up for a good week. Is all about calendaring, I think. So Sunday night, my husband and I go through like the family calendar and like who's going to take what piece and who's doing pickup for this and who's doing drop off. And then Monday mornings, my assistant and I sit down and do the same thing. Like, okay, what's on the docket this week? What do we have to move? What's double booked? What, you know, now I have to be in, X city. So that's really helpful to set me up for a good week. And like as I'm doing that, especially on the work side, is like, all of these things are really important and what's actually going to drive the business forward. So that's been a really good dimension to add into it. This last year is just making sure that it's very focused as we get
Yeah,
busier and busier. It's like, how do we stay focused on what's important and moving? Um, so that's been for the week. For the days, um, so mornings are kind of chaotic because I'm involved in like kid drop off and all of that. My husband does pickup, which is super helpful. And so chaotic morning. I don't really like early mornings. So, get up, put on some yoga pants, get the kids to school and then come back. And then that's when I have my quiet time before the day starts because they're at school at
mm,
7:30. So then, taking some time, taking the dog on a walk, having a cup of tea, catching up on the news, spending half hour, 45 minutes, just by myself and then diving into the day.
it sounds kind of divine, I have to say. Um, well, speaking of your kids, what three words would your kids use to describe you?
Oh, they would say bossy. They say I am always giving them chores to do. I think they have no idea, but they would say that. So they would say, and then I think they would say I was fun, and that I was loving.
Oh, those are good ones. And so how getting
Mm.
into like you, like how are you parenting differently than how you were raised? Like where are you from originally?
Yeah, I'm originally from Canada, so from Abbotsford, BC, sort of Vancouver area. Big family, so five kids, four girls, one boy, and was raised, in a really loving family, really wonderful family. We had a lot of rules and like strictness, I think, growing up, and I imagine if I had five kids, I'd probably do the exact same thing. That's a lot of people to
Yeah.
manage.
And where are you in the
Uh,
birth order?
I'm in the middle. I'm middle
Yeah.
child. Yeah. And so I think maybe one of the things that we've done differently is, um, really setting like expectations for our kids. I think, kind of going back to the other question, my kids probably would say I have expectations of how they're supposed to behave and what, sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't. But, um, my husband and I as parents are, hey, here's your two choices. Like everything in life is a choice. You don't get to pick the consequences of what happened, but you absolutely get to control your entire environment. You can go to bed without a fight, or you can go to bed with a big fight. Like those are your choices. And, this one results in good things happening, and this one results in not good things happening. And so I think there's a lot of that we try to make our kids understand that they have a fair amount of control over some things, some things they don't. If
Yeah.
my
How old are
10-year-old's
they?
being, yeah, he's 10 and my daughter's 7.
Oh yeah, those are fun ages though. Wow. So tell me
Yeah.
about your childhood. You had the five of you, and
Hmm.
your dad, I think, right, was in construction. Is that right? And your grandfather?
Yep. My dad was in construction and then sales for tools and construction equipment. And then my grandfather owned his own steel company for most of his career, or a couple
Mm-hmm.
different companies. Yeah.
And when you weren't in school, how were you spending your time? And outside of that, like within school, did you like it?
Yeah. I loved school. When I wasn't in school, I spent my time with my friends. I loved doing art. I loved doing puzzles. I loved doing things like that. Just being creative, drawing. I did a lot of drawing. Um, and when I was in school, I loved it. I really, really loved learning. I still do love learning. I majored in design when I was in college and I minored in French and just always trying to learn everything I can.
Yeah. And did you have a sense, I guess let's talk middle school age.
Yeah.
Like, what would your friends say if I were to meet them today? Would they be surprised that you're an entrepreneur, or would they be like, oh yeah, no, that's always been her destiny? Like, what were you like then, and what did you want to be?
Yeah, so interesting. I was homeschooled in middle school. So like last few years of elementary school and most of middle school, I was homeschooled. So I think my friends would mostly be my siblings, and they would say yes, that tracks. And then as I went into high school, um, one of my really earliest friends from high school that I still hang out with, she's like, "Oh, you've always been my business friend." Like she's always like, "You're always that one that's doing something." So, no, I mean when
Yeah.
we moved here, so I was an immigrant to the U.S. from Canada and wasn't able to work until I was well into my 20s with like an actual visa and permit, but was always trying to figure out ways to make money and do things, babysitting, washing the neighbors' windows, just whatever I could do to try to figure out how to make money and do something.
Yeah. And so your friends, how come you were homeschooled? Was that common, or your mom had an idea of like
Yeah,
giving you a
I
different
think
type of education?
yeah, a bunch of all of my siblings were homeschooled at some point, and I think it was pretty common in like in Canada in like that region that we lived in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think my mom just wanted to try it. She had some friends that had done it and thought it would be good, and definitely pros and cons. I was able to skip a grade when we moved down to the States, so I skipped eighth grade and just went straight into high school. But
Oh, wow. Seventh grade
yeah,
to high school. Interesting. And what
yeah.
brought you guys to the States?
My dad's work actually. So he got transferred or, got the opportunity to take a transfer. And so they decided they wanted to do it. And most of my family is about split now. Half have since moved back to Canada, including my parents. And then
Hmm.
half kind of ended up either loving the States and staying here or meeting someone and getting married and staying here. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And at what stage of your life would you say that you realized that you had like an entrepreneurial bug?
I would say probably in college or like right after college. I kept trying to like start my own businesses in college. I had done a couple since I graduated. So, would work and then have my own business, work, have my own business. And so, um, I think it was really trying to find the right thing
Hmm.
to really pour my efforts into.
Were you initially thinking interior design? I know that's what you studied at the Art
Yep.
Institute of Illinois. And so, how did you decide? I mean, coming from Canada, I always love understanding people's choices. Like, what else were you
Yeah.
looking at, and how did you even discover that school?
Yeah, so I wanted to be an interior designer since I was very young. I remember, being in Canada building little tiny homes in like doll homes in shoe boxes or things. Like I
Yeah.
just really loved the idea of space and the built environment and um so I wanted to do that forever. So when I was graduating, it was really trying to look at find a place that would work well for that career. And
Hmm.
so, because we still didn't have green cards, I was here on like an L2 visa. So, because of that, I wasn't able to get in state tuition. So, we were living in Vancouver, Washington at the time. And I see your hat, go Huskies. So, a lot of my friends,
Yes.
went up to Seattle and or went over to Eastern Washington. But since I wasn't going to be able to get in-state tuition, I was like, well, if I'm paying out-of-state tuition somewhere, I want to at least go out of state and get that experience as well. So my
Yeah.
sister was living in Chicago at the time, and so I started researching schools. And then one of my other sisters was living in Toronto, so I started researching schools in Toronto and in Chicago, and really found that the Art Institute had a really nice balance of what I was looking for. And I love the idea of being in a bigger city and really just, having a different experience. I'd, grown up and always lived on the West Coast and in the Pacific Northwest specifically. So really just looking for something that was like a different experience geographically, just, city size, all of those things
Yeah, Chicago is
I
such
was
a
ready for a
cool
change.
place, though. So, did
Yeah,
you stay? Tell me about
such a
your
cool
career and
place.
like kind of what launched you right out of college. Did you start working right away, or what was your path? And looking back, like, was it
Yes.
the right path?
Yeah, I had a great and really fun path right out of college. So I had actually gone like the spring right before my last semester. I had gone on a group trip with a bunch of friends to Jamaica, and I was living in Chicago at the time and was really trying to like find a way to get back to the Northwest. And so I was talking to one of the people on the trip, and I was saying, yeah, I need to get an internship for my final, semester at college, and I'm trying to, I have a few that I could do in Chicago, but I'm trying to find one in Oregon, so that, in Portland, so that I can move back and kind of have something anchored. She's like, oh, I actually work at a huge architectural firm. And I was like, what? So she connected me with the director of interiors, and, I went through the interview process and landed the internship with them. But it was great. I worked directly with a couple of the principals, and ended up being there for 5 or 6 years. And then did a lot of hotel and restaurant design and some housing design, but mostly hospitality. And it was really fun. I very much enjoyed having that experience to just dive in and
That's
sink or
so
swim and get it
cool.
figured out and do it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And did you think that you would do that ongoing? I mean, I know you've done the design, and then you were also,
Hmm.
worked on the manufacturing side.
Yep.
Totally different. One's kind of, I think of it in my brain as different. Like, how would you compare
Yeah.
those experiences?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I didn't realize as, an interior designer is just like the broad set of skills that you get with any job, right? Like you think, okay, I'm going to do this job and this applies here, but you're really learning a lot of project management skills. You're really learning a lot of soft skills, a lot of client management skills. You're also learning selling, right? Like you're selling one of the hardest things to do, which is an idea. You're not even selling a
Yeah,
product or anything that exists. So, you're selling to someone, hey, this is going to look really nice. You should spend $30 million bringing this exact vision to reality, right? And I don't think I
right.
realized like the all those different skill sets. I definitely wanted to do design. Um, went into it thinking that would be my career, but like so many of us, things change, and for one reason or another, you want to try something new, and so ended up going to the sales side and being a manufacturer's rep for a few different companies. And I think it was that sort of process of selling that was my thread through, that I really found that I am very much driven by people and by helping people. And so whether that's helping a person, design a building and create a space for whatever activity they're trying to accomplish, or if it's helping designers by helping them find the right products for their projects, that's really where I get a lot of value, is just engaging with people and meeting new people, and ultimately like helping people solve problems. And
Yeah.
that's
Well, I'm
really
guessing
for
you're
me.
an extrovert.
I am an extrovert, yes. Very.
I am
I index
too.
very big E. Yep.
Yeah, I do too. Like literally like off the charts. Although I'm not sure about you, but I changed a little bit during COVID, or at least I had an
Yeah.
awareness that I
Yeah.
could kind of like access more of my introversion. And um, it was a good forcing function to just be like, you know what, I'm gonna have like whatever they call it, like JOMO, like joy of
Yeah.
missing out. I used to have like total
Yes.
FOMO.
Yeah,
That's so funny.
absolutely.
What were they
Yeah, I did the same
manufacturing? You
thing.
said you went into manufacturing, and like what were the things that you were selling?
Yeah, so tile, various types of flooring, and then the last job I had before I started Source was countertops, like quartz countertops, granite countertops, stone countertops, um, things like that.
Yeah. And so interestingly, I feel like some people, um, would have just kind of gone exactly as an extension, like, let me just now continue to sell countertops or tile, but just do it for myself, like start my own company, but in something that's really
Mm-hmm.
comfortable. Versus
Yeah,
you, like, kind of really pivoted and found a pain point, which I would love for you to describe, and then like taught
yeah,
yourself how to code and like went kind of really doubled down in a way of like, I'm going to kind of do what I kind of know, but also be uncomfortable in what I don't know.
yeah.
Like, that's unique.
Yeah, that being uncomfortable in what you don't know, I think is like probably a lasting trait through many entrepreneurs is that you have an idea of some of the things that you're going to want to do, but you know that there's this like steep hill and you're just going to have to figure out how to get there.
Yeah.
So for me, like that pain point was really around just transparency and simplicity in the construction arena. So we focus on commercial construction, right? So hotels, hospitals, workplace, lots of big, complicated spaces with a lot of different stakeholders involved. And I think what happens is everybody in the industry has sort of, created all these very specific silos of what they do and what they don't do. And it's created a lot of just redundancy, right? Where you're only giving this much information to this person and then you're giving this much information to this person and it's really hard. Like an example is when you're selecting product, right? It's like, oh well, we don't tell the design teams how much things cost, we tell the contractors how much things cost. Well, that's great, except the design teams are the ones selecting everything and planning the project. So if they're planning it and using the wrong things, then it's over budget. When the contractor prices it, then we just get to do the whole thing over again. And sort of that type of mentality of everything being siloed and just very cumbersome, I think was really interesting to me to find a way to drive simplicity um, in a massive industry that could have real substantial change on the built environment, on global supply chains, on climate change, on all of these things, right? Like bringing transparency to an industry that's 5% of GDP seems like, why hasn't this been done yet?
Yeah. And so it hasn't been done. Are there competitors?
I always say there's like three components of source. So there's sort of the like, help me find exactly and make decisions around what we should be using. And then there's the second part around the documentation and really fine tuning that decision. And then the third part about purchasing the products and getting it to site. So I would say we certainly have competitors in each of those three arenas. What we don't have is somebody that has taken this like A to Z look at it and said, look, the only way we're going to be able to change this is by being involved at the end and pushing that data back to the people making decisions at the beginning, and then having this virtuous cycle where we can continue to, you know, elevate the industry by bringing transparency to it and by saying, hey,
Hmm.
you're trying to find something, here's where that's going to land. And so we don't really have a competitor as far as somebody that's doing that from A to Z on a national or global scale like we are. But we certainly have competitors in, succinct portions of what we do.
Little siloed parts of it. And so,
Hmm.
um, I don't know that you need to, or maybe you want to give a specific example of like using names, but like it'd be super helpful for me to give an example
Yeah.
of how a customer partners with you and who are the customers. Like if somebody's listening that's like, oh, sweet, Shauna, you had this person listen. Who
Yeah.
who is that person that you're selling into?
Yeah, so we are typically selling into like an asset manager or a project manager, someone that owns a piece of real estate and is developing it or remodeling it for a specific purpose. So an example would be, I'm a hotel owner and I have a portfolio of properties, and I am renovating the Marriott in the downtown of the city where I live. And so I've hired an architect and designer. They're on board to help find the products and come up with the plans and, do all the very many things that architects and designers do. And then I've hired a general contractor who's going to coordinate labor and who's going to, coordinate getting the thing built. And then where Source comes in is we really act as like their purchasing agent. So we're the ones that say, okay, here's all the things that are going to be purchased. Either here we're going to slice off this bucket of items, and these few things will go to the general contractor. Um, all the commodities like steel, rebar, all of that is going to go to the contractor. We don't do those pieces. But okay, the furniture, the finishes for the hotel, the carpet, the wall covering, the tile, the decorative lighting, all the case goods in the units, all the soft seating, that's all going to go to the purchasing agent. And so what we do is we contract with the owner to do that. And then we coordinate timing of delivery with the general contractor, and we coordinate, design intent and shop drawings and like what those pieces actually look like with the design team. So we're really responsible for making their design visions, realized in a physical product. And bid those out. So then we coordinate with vendors from around the world. So we might have 40 different vendors that we're coordinating to make sure everything gets on the ships at the right time, gets to the warehouse, and ultimately gets to the job site in time for the contractor to install it. Or maybe we have some furniture installers that are bringing the furniture in. So it's really that coordination and purchasing piece.
And so the ultimate end customer there in that scenario is Marriott.
Well, it's the hotel owner, which you kind of think would be a Marriott, but Marriott's actually like a franchise.
Yeah, or
So it
that's
would
what I
be
mean though,
like,
as an example. It's
yep,
not, it's
yep,
Marriott. And so
exactly.
then,
Yep,
and then is it, so it's a technology where then they give access to certain aspects of the technology to either the contractor or the designer, or
yep,
is that how it works?
exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
it's very much like a marketplace, right? So I think
Yeah.
the interesting thing about this industry is most of the purchases in this industry are run off of Excel. And so there's very little transparency into like, how far out is my tile? How far along is this? Where is this in the production queue? And so we're really building transparency around that post-purchase process as well as around the decision-making process so that everyone
Mm-hmm.
can say, okay, what's the tile we need for this? We need it to be X dollars a square foot and it needs to be here by June 5th. Okay, what are our options that fit in that? What meets the design criteria? All
Or
right, now we've got that
it's
narrowed
so
down.
incredibly brilliant. I am just thinking about it from the perspective of
Yeah.
very small potatoes, but like when we built
Like a,
our house,
yeah,
We had moved from New York and we had only lived in apartments, and it was
yeah,
like we're making these decisions about the faucet before we're
yeah,
even broken ground. And I'm like, wait. I don't know if I should go high on I don't know what other
yeah,
decisions I'm making and in what
yeah,
order. And
yeah,
so it's very difficult, especially because I said to the builder at the end, he's a friend. And I was like, as a friend, I'm telling you to make the experience better for your customer, to give them like an entire like notebook at the beginning almost
yeah,
to kind of let them know what the whole project's going to look like and what decisions are going to be made and what the deadlines are going to be, so that we can budget with relative information, not just like in kind of siloed decision
yeah.
making efforts. It was,
Bits and pieces.
yeah,
Yep,
interesting. And so
exactly.
what's the business model, Nicole? Like, how do you guys make money? And is it the
Yeah.
same business model that you launched with in 2018 or 19?
Yeah. So not the same business model we launched with. We were subscription based for architects and designers at that point. And we've since really switched into a marketplace model. So free for architects and designers to use, free for industry professionals to like plan their projects on. And then where we monetize is on the purchase of goods. So very much a marketplace model where um, we're negotiating a fee or a percentage of the project. And then we give the owner transparency around that. So we're negotiating that with the owner when we sign the contract. And
Mm.
then we're able to say, okay, here's the actual price for all of your goods, and here's the fee that we've negotiated that we'll add on to that to pay for our technology and for our team to support this project. But yeah, that's how we monetize. And yeah, it was definitely different than where we started.
Interesting. And so, how's the growth been looking over the years? How was COVID for the business?
Yeah, COVID was really interesting for the business. So one of the things that we launched in COVID was the actual the last component of the platform, which is the purchasing side. So we had the decision making part, that discovery part, and then launched the purchasing side in COVID. And we were, definitely got some tailwinds from that. Where when we launched it that first quarter, we were able to do some good volume that first quarter, but then the next year, so that was in the end of 21. The next year we grew 10x off of that. The following year we grew, another 10x off of that, and have really been busy this year,
Yeah,
just
my
making sure that we
gosh.
do it
Good for
well. And
you.
yeah, and I think just really we've been really strategic about what goes on the to don't list, right? It's like what is driving the business forward? What is that prioritization? Where do we need to focus? And what is something that can, wait a quarter or wait 2 quarters or just fall off the list completely that we don't need to do.
Mm, okay.
And
And
that's
tell,
been one of the hardest things I think with the business is there's so much low hanging fruit in construction as far as
oh my
problems to
gosh,
solve,
it's
right? There's
endless.
there's so many ways that you could improve the experience, and
Oh
so
yeah.
focus and really making sure we're staying in the right lanes has been. We're getting better at it. We're certainly getting better at it, but it's been a
Yeah.
challenge. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I think you're doing great. I mean, it's incredible. So how did you fund the business initially? I know that you've raised, I think, an A round, up to an A
yeah, we
round.
just raised an A this summer. Yep.
Yeah, congrats on that. And especially because like I know that we talked a little bit before we started recording about like, I've had several females on here and many that have raised capital from venture
Yeah,
funding and just even friends and family, but it's like so much more challenging for women.
yeah,
The statistics are crazy, like less than 2% of
yeah,
capital goes to women or something like
yeah,
that, something crazy. And especially
yeah.
in
I
a
love
male
the
dominated industry. Like,
yeah.
how were you able to do it and how many like frogs did you have to kiss?
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Like the less than 2% of VC,
It's
capital
crazy.
goes to women is crazy.
Right. And I don't know the
And
statistics. You might know this because there's like your world, but there's something around the ROI on actually um, investing in women. They produce
yeah,
better outcomes
yeah, they
statistically. So I'm like,
do.
why the hell are women not getting more funding? It makes no sense.
Someone summed up the funding like they're like to put that in perspective, the last year that Juul raised a big round of capital, like Juul
Oh
e-cigarettes,
yeah, the
that
cigarettes,
that one company raised more than all
all
venture
women
female venture-backed
combined.
companies combined. Yeah.
Yeah, I read
Um,
that. I read that you said that
yeah.
in an interview. That actually shocked me. And then there was someone else who said, I think it was Amy from Riveter. She's a friend of mine. She was on
Yeah.
the podcast, but she said something about like there's more men named John on publicly traded
Yeah.
boards than all women combined. I'm like, what?
Yes,
That's crazy.
exactly. It's crazy. So, I mean, I think one of the things that I learned the hard way that I would love, to share forward is really that a lot of the fundraising advice and here's how you go raise around and here's what you do um, is done by people who have successfully raised venture capital
Mm,
that may not look like me or have
right.
had similar experiences as me. And so I don't think I really realized what that meant in practice right away. And so, you hear a lot of like, make your hit list, do your research on the VCs, go really working it very much like a sales funnel, right? Like here's your top of funnel, pitch them, try to get in front of them, get the meeting set, pitch them, have your B list first, then you go to your A list. You just kind of work down the funnel till you get, a couple term sheets at the end of the process. And so it's like, okay, well, that's what you do. So, here's that process that I'm going to do. And I think what I found is that specific process didn't work for me. So whether that's because I'm a woman or because that's my personal style or a combination of those two or whatever the reasons were, is that the process that worked for me was actually being a lot more like rifle approached. And so, in the sales world, it was being much more like a hunter, right? Than like um, I don't know, like a fisherman. Um, so what I would do is, and I plan on just continuing this process if we raise more capital, but really taking the opportunity to research like a handful, maybe 5 to 10 funds that I think would be really good strategic fits for our company. So
Mm-hmm.
instead of finding like 100 people that play in the space that we play in, like I'm going to find 5 to 10 that I think would be value add to the company. That I research the partners that they've said smart things in their media appearances that I agree with, that I feel like have similar values. I look at their Twitter feeds. I just try to find out as much about them as a
What are
human.
you looking for when you're looking? Like when you say similar values, like
Um,
how do you even assess that through that research?
so I mean, I think One of the things that was important to me, and it's nice to see that the industry has changed, but somebody that's not like growth at all costs, growth at all costs, growth at
Yeah,
all costs, that
exactly.
it's like, as we've, so, kind of going back to your other question, is we bootstrapped the business for about 18 months, then raised a pre-seed and a seed round, and then just raised our Series A. And so for me, right before we raised the Series A, we were a profitable company. And so, now we're reinvesting in the company and we have a 12-month path back to profitability. And so for us, it's sort of this cycle of like profitability and investment, profitability and
Well,
investment.
that's brilliant. That's the way to go if you can.
Well, and it's also like, it's works out really well now, but it's also born of necessity, right? Like less than 2% of women raise venture capital, so we got to have a backup plan. Like standing on our
Yeah,
own 2 feet is our backup plan.
totally.
And so for me, just making sure that I have an investor that is aligned with that. That obviously I'm aligned with growth. That my investors are aligned with growth. We all want to see growth. That's a very important part of being a venture backed business, and that is not to be minimized. We just don't want to do growth at all costs, right? We
Right,
want to do
exactly.
growth.
Customer first. Yeah.
hmm and really sustainable, long view growth. Make sure that we're not making a decision that's good for this quarter, making sure we're making a decision that's good for the company 5 years from now.
Yeah. And who's advising you about all this? Like, I mean, you've obviously got just kind of natural business acumen. You've got a sales background. You're great with people. You love people. But like, understanding cap tables and understanding
Yeah.
growth trajectories and all of that just seems so intimidating when it's a first run. Like who's
Yeah.
your in your corner? Because and you and I talked about this when we first met, like the kind of
Yeah.
lonely at the top thing where you
Yeah.
want to be vulnerable, but you can't be too vulnerable with your board. You can't be too vulnerable
Yeah.
with your team. And your husband's probably a great partner, but like enough's enough. I don't
Yeah.
really want to hear about the source anymore. Like, so
Totally.
who are you talk to about this stuff that where you can really kind of be vulnerable and be like, I don't know.
Yeah, I have a group of there's four other female entrepreneurs, and so the five of us meet fairly regularly, maybe once a month or so, as
Mm-hmm.
much as we can. So they're a good sounding board for me too. And then I've joined and been part of like different organizations. Like I was part of Portland Incubator Experiment when I first started the company here in Portland. I was part of a group called Accelerate. So I think
Nice.
finding a good group for the stage that my company is in has been really helpful. And then just, being doing two things in those groups. One is being as helpful as possible to people that I can help, and then mining that group for help when I need it. So, in the early days, it was like, okay, let me find out, who can help me learn about venture capital, right? Like I went from like my complete understanding of venture capital was I think Facebook has raised money at some point was my full complete understanding of venture capital to like, okay, now I can like walk through deal terms and understand a cap table. And so it's like, okay, read the book Venture Deals, do this, understand this, here's a bunch of articles and things to research. So, I mean, it's that love of learning. I think I, one of my favorite things about being an entrepreneur is you only have a job for like 6 months. So
Yeah.
my focus gets to, okay, now I get to learn all about HR. Now when you're raising money, then I'm going to learn all about, when we were first raising money, I need to learn about venture capital. So that's the thing I'm going to become an expert in now. And now we're hiring people. So now I'm going to learn about onboarding and company
Yeah.
culture and that. And, now we're growing. And so we have to sort of think about how the teams are aligned and what people are doing. So now I'm going to,
Yeah. There's so many, I've
learn about
spoken on a
that.
few panels about this kind of stuff. There's so many things to think about. You can always call me offline
Yeah.
because there's so many things I've seen startups do right and wrong, even around
Yeah.
like over titling or too early or
Yes.
hiring for today, but not for 3 to 5 years from now, or,
Yep.
hiring people who aren't meant to be working at a startup, even though they think it sounds sexy, but they don't really have the stomach for it, or they
Yep.
don't have the support system around it.
Yep.
Um,
I think those
yeah,
two things, the over titling and I also am like an incessant question asker. I just ask questions of everyone,
that's
and I think
great.
a couple of the questions that I asked over and over as I was starting are like, what mistakes do you see people making with their teams? And what are the main reasons that you see startups fail? Right? It's like, what are the things? And it was like, they run out of money. Like it's the
Yeah.
number one reason startups fail. They run out of capital. So don't run out of capital because nothing else matters if you can't pay your bills. And co-founder conflict. Those are the top two reasons that startups
Yeah.
fail. And then team stuff, or from my totally anecdotal, like, experience. Um, and then the team things were, the biggest issues are like not hiring the right type of person, like
Yes.
a startup, a generalist. Is it for today? Is it for 5 years from now? What are you hiring for? And then the over titling.
Yeah.
And so
And the
I was
early
very
people need to
careful.
be definitely a little bit more of a Swiss Army knife than a total
Yeah.
expert because like you said, you're like
Yeah.
one day I'm the office manager and the next day I'm HR and the next day I'm a recruiter, the next day I'm
Yeah.
IT and that's
Yeah.
just part of being in a startup. And I have so many examples, mostly I think we have like a less than 1% fall off rate where they don't work out. But the couple placements that we've made that haven't worked out that weren't the right fit were like almost like too slow for a startup. Like the
Yeah.
person was big company mentality and they wanted to like, put out something to bid to 10 big agencies are like big agencies and we don't
Yeah.
have the funding for that. Like we don't have no
Yeah.
budget for that. Like just figure it
You're
out. You
like,
do it
no, I just
yourself.
need you to do it by
Just,
Friday.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like I just need this
Yeah.
done. And
Yeah.
the like, I got to go because I got to go to Pilates. It's like, no, this has to be your baby and it has to be a top
Yeah.
priority. And somebody that's genuinely passionate about what you're building, not just trying to hit the like unicorn status payday, because
Yeah.
that doesn't happen that often.
Yeah.
Although, based on what you're saying, I think that you're like you're headed in a good direction.
Well, thank you for
Tell
saying
me more
that.
about like how you are able to, um, like keep up with all the trends and all the things happening and all of the data. Like, how do you make sure that that stays clean and stays current and accurate? Because aren't you having like you're exporting a bunch of photos from all the products from like I read like 1900 brands. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff to have to navigate and deal with.
Yeah, so we worked really early on to try to create different data pipelines for manufacturers to upload their data to the platform. So whether they have, all the way from like, okay, we have an API set up, which is very rare. There's less than a handful of people in this industry that have that already done.
Mm-hmm.
To like, okay, we're getting data feeds sent over once a week, or we're getting a CSV file once a month, or, whatever that looks like. So in the early days, we really did kind of whatever we needed to do to get that on the platform. But as we've,
Mm-hmm.
gotten more users and built more technology around automating that, we've been able to really like reduce the friction around that experience. So I think for us, it's really about one of the values that we bring to the table is the ability to normalize all that data, right? So, like if you're thinking about fabric manufacturers, there's codes that it needs to be met around fire resistance. And so one might call it FR treated, another one might call it fire rated, another one might call it fire resistant. So they'll all call it different things and then give it this like California bulletin code that it meets. And so we're able to normalize all of that data across a variety of different manufacturers so that when you search for it and you're trying to look for something that might meet that code requirement, that you're comparing apples to apples as much as possible.
Okay, interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
then do you work with different companies to get kind of different samples? Like how do you, there's a lot of like logistics stuff too, like all the operations, all the logistics.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that that runs smoothly? Like what, I know you only have, I think you have not only, but kind of only 15
Yeah.
employees. And it sounds like you're just like handling a monstrosity of data and products and customers and
Yeah. Yeah. So we have about 53 employees.
oh,
And
53.
so
I read it wrong. Okay.
yeah.
So you have
Okay.
53
Yeah.
employees.
So, but yeah, so on samples, like, okay, we can go back to that fabric example. If, the designer or the building owner wants to see a sample of that fabric, they'll request it on the platform, and then that will automatically send a ping to the brand, and the brand will send that directly to them. The vendor will. Um,
Mm,
and so the vendor will send over that fabric. And then for the actual order, so let's say they're like, okay, great, this fabric looks great. This is in our price, it's in our lead time. This is the what we're going to go with for the draperies in this hotel. So then we manage sending over that purchase order to the vendor and say, okay, vendor A, send your fabric to vendor B, who's then going to turn it into draperies. So we facilitate that shipping. And we have an internal logistics team that manages all of that.
Mm.
So they facilitate that this, fabric gets sent from vendor A to vendor B, and then vendor B then sends it to the hotel, and then they install it, or have an installer do it. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And so you're saying hotel. What are the different industries or different partners and customers that you're doing business with? Like what's the breakdown?
yeah. So for the verticals that we work in, we do, more than 60% of our revenue right now comes from the hospitality industry. We also
Mm-hmm.
do a fair amount in different types of housing. So multifamily housing, like if you think of all the amenity spaces, things like that.
Mm.
We do student housing, public and private. And we do senior housing as well. So, a senior care center, different areas within that. We work with those clients as well. We do a little bit of workplace, but that's probably our smallest segment to date.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
It sounds like, I mean, obviously it's kind of endless what you can build because you can touch on so many different areas. You're not
Yeah.
limited at all. And I know that
Yeah.
one of the things that is important to you, you've talked a little bit about transparency. Um, and I'm sure that your customers super benefit from that. How much weight do they place on your passion and interest in like sustainability and, um, kind of doing good?
Yeah. I mean, for us, we're really there to meet every customer where they're at, right? So some have very high requirements. We want everything to be red list free. We want no chemicals of concern. We want, the highest of the highest standard of
Mm-hmm.
sustainability. And so we're able to serve the products and leverage the data to get them the products that meet that criteria. And some, it's not important at all. And so, that's really comes down to us trying to educate them and say, hey, like, here's an example of a few products that would work. This one, they're similar price points. This one has a better story behind it. And I think that what we find is that every customer is interested in making their end users experience better, right? So
Mm.
it's really, I think, how you frame that for certain people. In the Northwest, where it's easy to get passionate and get buy-in on sustainability, and in other parts of the country that's not the way, right? Like I went to visit my
Yeah.
sister in Toronto and they don't even have recycling, so it's
I
it
know, isn't
depends
that
every
unbelievable? And they're like, no, we don't compost, no
yeah.
recycling. Yeah, it's so
Exactly.
different. Do you have
So
customers nationally and globally, or are you just in the US right now?
we're just in the US right now. Yep, so all across the US, every time zone in the US, but currently just one country.
And do you have plans to expand globally?
We do. Yep, absolutely, we're looking forward to that.
Yeah. What are some of your other growth plans? Like if we sit down and call it, let's just be easy right now since it's like one day at a time, but like 1 year and you
Yeah.
can look back and you've had like 10x growth. It's not always about growth. Like what will make you feel
Yeah.
like I'm doing a kick-ass job? I am in the right seat.
Yeah, I think one of the metrics that we track here is would you recommend Source as a good place to work? So even with this massive growth that we've seen over the last few years, we've consistently rated above 90% or higher as our employees saying that they would say Source is a good place to work. So I'd say that's a huge metric for me, regardless of the growth of the company. Is like, are we taking care of the people that work here? Like first and foremost, because that's the right thing to do as a human being. And it also happens to be good for the company as well. So I think that's always a key metric for me is are we taking care of the team appropriately so they can take care of our clients appropriately. And then another metric is growth for me. I'm super excited about the potential of the company, and we're just if I think about where we have to go, it's a really, really big vision and goal. We want to be the largest platform for commercial construction products, on the planet. And so, that's a big goal. And so if we don't want it to take 600 years to get there, we got to bite off a fair chunk every year. So, our denominator is bigger now, so I don't think it'll be a 10x, in a year, but I'd love to say that we, doubled or tripled. So, really, really looking forward to continuing to grow the company, because that means that we're providing value, something of value to our clients, and that we're doing something right and we're making someone's life better. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
And so, how will you continue to hold on to not your personal values that you would change, but your personal values as they can touch all of your employees, all of your
Yeah.
customers? Because that's one of the challenges in growth is that
Yeah.
you're like, oh shit, I used to know everybody's names. I knew all of our clients. I knew
Yep.
kind of every moving part of the business. And there's this weird kind of moment where it's like it's exciting to not have that, but it's also scary to kind of like let
Yeah.
go.
Well,
How do you
that's why I need to
what
talk to
are your
Oprah.
values?
That's why I need to talk to Oprah, remember? That's what
I
I want to learn from
know.
her.
Yeah.
No,
How, well, just, yeah, totally.
I think for me, it's one of the things that I struggle with that, and I'm sort of in the midst of struggling with that, is that, the a team of 53 is, much different than a team of 15, right?
Yeah.
I did know everyone's, obviously I still know everyone's name. I hope I can at least remember 53 names, but it's like I know everyone's name and what they do, but I don't know their story, right? Whereas when it was 15 people, I knew their cats, I knew their family, I knew, what they
Totally.
were doing, right? All those things. And so, um, for me, one of the things that we're going to do this year is start doing skip levels, so that I can, at least, one or two people a week that I can just meet and have coffee with, and just, engage with people. But I think one of the things that's been helpful for me as a founder is, talking with people who are maybe like one or two sort of stages ahead of me in growth, and learning from them. And so, it's like the people who are like 10 stages ahead of me in growth, or 100 stages ahead of me in growth, certainly have many valuable lessons, but maybe not as many front of mind for them that I can action today. So if
Mm-hmm.
it's, somebody that's, that's one or two stages ahead, that's really helpful. It's kind of like, I don't know, when you have little kids, it's great to know somebody with a toddler when you have a
100%.
baby, right? Because then you're getting their
Always.
hand-me-downs.
Oh
It's like
yeah.
if they're
Or
just
even
like
just like
two,
now we're in like college. I have a kid that's in
yeah,
college and I've other kid, another one that's going to be applying to college, but like it was
yeah,
helpful for me to have friends that could tell me what that
yeah,
process looks like, or in any phase of life. It's always good to have your kind
exactly.
of trusted
That's sort of just
advisors.
just an
Yeah.
inch ahead of you, right? So it's like
Yeah.
when you have a newborn, like you're like valuable insights from your friends that have kids in college. We have friends with kids of all different ages. Like they have valuable insights. However, by the time my kids are going to go to college, it's probably going to
It's
be
gonna
a
be a whole
totally
different
different
set of
process anyways,
information.
right?
Yeah.
And so really, I think for me as a founder is trying to find entrepreneurs that I really look up to. And, we have some fabulous entrepreneurs here in Oregon. And like I have time in a couple of weeks to meet with, Kim, the founder of Salt and Straw Ice Cream. And so like, she's really known for being a culture warrior and a culture ambassador. And so I'm going to like learn everything I can from her. And so I think,
Yeah.
finding people that can just give you, and she is much more than one or two phases ahead of me, but I'm cheating on that one because she's so brilliant. So, just,
Yeah.
really finding incremental ways to learn and grow to that next layer as a CEO and as a founder
Yeah.
and as a person.
And what's been your recruiting strategy so far? And how do right now it's a little bit easier to draw in talent because there's more access to talent than when you first started. But
Yeah.
what has your strategy been and what are your long-term plans for like the people side of growth?
Yeah. So, I mean, like a lot of other startups, we started with, referral based, right? It's like, oh, we need to fill this. Does anybody know someone that does this? And, I think maybe more than 80%, I would have to pull the numbers, but I think, almost all of our employees have come from a referral with a handful of exceptions. So that was a strong indicator moving forward, or in the past. And I think moving forward, one of the things that we have work to do on is, we're hitting that stage where we can't continue to rely just on that we need to make sure that we have a good reputation as an employer, that we are out there in the market, that we are actively hunting for really great high quality talent. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's sort of our next evolution as a company is getting into that, instead of referral based, really getting into recruiting um, as its own, you know, skill
Like,
set within the
yeah,
company. Yeah,
like
with
a
its own
whole role.
focus.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes sense.
exactly.
That makes sense. Well, I'm excited to see you grow. I know you're going to hit lots of milestones, and I'll be cheering you on along the way. And you're
Thank
on a
you.
personal level. How I know that you're setting yourself up for a good morning, a good day, a good week. But how do
Yeah.
you balance your time as far as, or do you do time blocking? Do you do I guess some people put like pauses on their emails. Like, are you a person who believes in multitasking? Like, what's your style
Yeah.
of
Yeah. I am
work
I
throughout the
am
day?
not I try not to multitask because I tend to not be very good at it. Um I I tend to try to focus on the task at hand. So whether that's I'm in a meeting or doing email or focus on some deep work project that I'm working on, I try to be wholly focused on that. So I break my email up into sort of blocks between meetings where I'll catch up on Slack and catch up on email, and get back to people there. And my team knows, like, hey, if it's a hot something that needs my eyes on it right away, text is my like bat signal. So text me when you need something immediately, and say, hey, check in Slack or check in email, so that I can get my eyes on things. But I try to break my day up so that it's allows me to focus on what's at hand. I have a tendency to get distracted easily and
Yeah,
like
I'm the
look
same
at the
way.
shiny new penny. And so really trying to say, okay, here's my block of time where I'm going to catch up on everything that's in my Slack channels, and here's email, and then here's some meetings that I'm going to do. And then, in the hybrid world, just blocking in person. Well, I wouldn't even call it in person. I would call it like makeup days together. Like, here's a day where I'm going to have a bunch of things where I can be camera off all day and just, not have to worry about being on. And then here's things where I'll be in person, or I'll be on, sales calls, or, all team calls, or things like that, where I want to, be a little more presentable. So,
Yeah,
um,
that makes sense.
yeah, yeah. So just
Well,
sort of
my
like
my
mental break days.
mental break days, I love that. And so my final question for you is, what fuels you?
What fuels me? I think for me, it always comes down to people, whether it's, my family, my kids, new experiences with friends. I love traveling, but I think, when I think about what fills me up, and the thing that I, couldn't live without in this world is that people connection, that I'm very, very, like we talked about at the beginning, I'm very motivated by helping people, by connection, high index as an extrovert. And, I think some of the most exciting things that we get back from our customers is, oh my gosh, this was so amazing. Like, Source made this, or this person at Source, or whatever it is, like, made this project so successful. We are
Oh,
excited to work with you guys on like every project moving forward. And we just had one of those come through the other day, and I was just like so happy, right? It's like you think this thing might work, and then those are the moments where you're like, no, it is working. This is great.
thank you for listening to the What Fuels You podcast. If you'd like to check out past episodes to hear from more business leaders, go to fueltalent.com/podcast. And if you have a minute, please leave a review and rating on your favorite podcast app, or share this episode with a friend or colleague. Please share any feedback or interview suggestions for other guests by sending a message to podcast@fueltalent.com. I'm Shauna Swerland, and thanks again for listening.